There was a son of the Emperor whose name was struck from every record, whose deeds were unspeaken, whose legion was scattered into the void, and the galaxy itself bears the scar of his absence like a wound that will not close. They do not speak of him in the gene vaults beneath Terra anymore. The servitors do not whisper his name as they tend the great tanks where they grew the 20. But I remember, and I am old enough that memory's a crime. In the dim reaches of old night, before the Great Crusade, before even the Thunder Warriors drew their first breath, the Emperor of Mankind, though he bore no such title then, stood in chambers lit by the pale glow of biotechnic crucibles and spoke the 20 into being. Each was a masterwork of genetic descent, each a God-forged tool to remake a shattered cosmos. They were decanted with such care, with such aching purpose, that the very air seemed to sing with destiny. But destiny is a liar. The 20 were flawed by design, not in their bodies, but in the nature of what was asked of them. They were created to conquer, yet some possessed the capacity to question. They were made to obey, yet something in their essential nature burned for freedom. And one, a singular failure in the eyes of those who wrought him, carried within his genetic legacy something that should not have survived the crucible, a conscience. His gestation took longer than the others. The Emperor stood at the threshold of his chamber for full days, watching the play of light through the amber fluids that sustained him. Those who were permitted to witness this, and they were few, spoke of sorrow in the Emperor's eyes, as though he already knew what this son would cost him. The scattering of the 20 across the galaxy was no accident, though history records it as misfortune. The Emperor knew that each must be isolated, must awaken to consciousness far from the palace, far from his influence, so that they might grow into their full potential unguided. But the scattering of this one, the forgotten, was different. I believe it was deliberate. I believe the Emperor, in a moment that even he could not escape, ensured that this son would be lost. The pod that bore him burned through the Astronomican's light with a trajectory that should not have been possible. It did not scatter to the known systems where the others fell. Instead, it descended through layers of void that ought not be navigable, through regions marked in the old charts only with the words "Here be silence," and came to rest on a world that even the Emperor, it seemed, could not easily find. The impact site was still smoking when I first heard the account, in the whispered legend of the void-born monks who served the Emperor's expedition fleets. A god fell from heaven, they said, and the world that caught him was forever changed. The world they called Corvus Prime orbited a star that astronomers would later struggle to locate in any stellar charts. It existed in the borderlands, where the light of the Astronomican wavered and grew thin, where the veil between material and immaterial seemed gossamer thin. To the few who found it in the centuries that followed, it was a place of impossible beauty and deep sorrow, a world that seemed to exist out of step with the rest of creation. When the pod descended, Corvus Prime had been home to the Keth for over 50,000 years. They were not human, though they were close enough that an observer might have made that mistake in dim light. Tall, pale-skinned, with eyes that reflected light like a cat's, they had built a civilization of profound restraint. Their cities rose not as monuments to ambition, but as expressions of balance. Their philosophy held that all things had an equal claim to existence, and that the greatest sin was the suppression of any conscious will. The Keth had learned this through terrible cost. In their own distant past, they had waged wars of conquest that burned their world from pole to equator. They had nearly driven themselves to extinction in their hunger for dominion. The survivors, perhaps 10,000 from billions, had sworn an oath to equilibrium. They would build no greater weapons. They would expand no colonies through force. They would permit all sentient species to develop as they would, intervening only when one threatened to dominate the others. It was a philosophy born of guilt and tragedy, and it was precisely the wrong philosophy to raise a godchild. The Primarch, I will call him Ascalon, though that was not the name his creators gave him, emerged from his pod at the age of apparent infancy, though his body already bore the markers of advanced maturation. The Keth found him in the wreckage, half buried in cooling metal and still smoking reactors. They did not understand what he was. Their sensors, attuned to biological variants, detected something so far outside their parameters that for 3 days they could not even agree that he was real. But one of them, a Keth called Viridian, who served as keeper of the Archive of Sorrow, recognized the truth. "He is alone," Viridian said, "as we once were alone with our guilt. We will not raise him to be a conqueror. We will raise him to be a witness." The Keth brought Ascalon to their city of mirrors, Corvith, they called it, which meant place where light knows itself. They fed him not on the meat and blood his body desperately required, but on knowledge. They taught him their philosophy of balance. They showed him the monuments to their wars, the black glass deserts where once their people had burned one another in millions. Sunik, a warrior philosopher, a god prince who believed that the highest form of stirred. They placed him in their temple of consequence and forced him to study the equations of suffering, the mathematics of victory that always, always includes the infinity of loss. Most importantly, they taught him to question. "What is the cost of your strength?" Viridian would ask him, year after year, as the boy grew into a young man. "Everything," Ascalon learned to answer. "My strength costs everything." The Keth raised him to be a philosopher before they raised him to be a warrior. When his body began to manifest the superhuman capabilities written into his genetic code, they did not celebrate. Instead, they intensified their lessons in restraint. They taught him meditation in the Temple of Silence. They made him fast for months at a time until his legendary physiology began to fail. They showed him that even a god could be broken by hunger, by doubt, by the weight of infinite possibility. It would have destroyed any normal child. But Ascalon was not normal, and the destruction that should have unmade him instead crystallized him into something unique, a warrior philosopher. A god prince who believed that the highest form of strength was the power to refuse to use strength. I write this account from memory, and my memory of that era stretches back further than it should. I am perhaps no longer entirely human, whatever that means. The events I describe were witnessed not by me directly, but by those who walked in the light of the Emperor and learned to bear the weight of his presence. But some knowledge lodges itself in you like a splinter, and eventually you are aware of it as though you had always known it. Such is my awareness of Ascalon's reunion with his father. The Emperor found him by not looking. The Great Crusade had recovered 18 of the 20 by that point, each found scattered across the human sectors of the galaxy, each raised by chance and circumstance into very different men. Some had become warlords, others had become kings, a few had become philosophers, teachers, priests of reason, but not one had possessed precisely what Ascalon possessed, a fundamental doubt about the righteousness of their father's grand design. The Emperor landed on Corvus Prime not to find his son, but to recover a missing expedition fleet that had gone dark in the region. The veil between worlds grew thin when his ship entered the system, the same thin veil that had allowed the Forgotten One to fall here in the first place. Power accumulated in his presence, as it always did. The void itself seemed to protest his arrival. Ascalon was 37 years old when he met his father, though his body bore the weight of something far older. The Keth had done what they could, but ultimately they could not slow his maturation. His mind had begun to run at speeds that outpaced even their contemplative traditions. His body had grown to nearly 9 feet in height, his frame bearing the superhuman musculature of his kind. But his eyes were sad, as though he had already lived 1,000 years and found each one wanting. The meeting took place in the Temple of Consequence. The Emperor came alone, which was remarkable in itself. Those few who witnessed it spoke of a moment of profound recognition, as though father and son saw in one another not just family, but a reflection of something they each feared about themselves. "You are one of mine," the Emperor said. His voice was quiet in that moment, not the thunderous command he used with his other sons. "I have been searching for you." "I know," Ascalon replied. "I have been waiting. I wondered if you would find me before it was too late." "Too late for what?" "For me to ask you the questions that need asking." In that exchange, the tragedy that would define Ascalon's life took shape. For the Emperor, too, I suspect, understood in that moment that this son could not be what the others were. The Great Crusade, the project to bring all of human space under the imperial truth, a philosophy that denied the divine, that demanded the conquest and subjugation of any who would not bend to human order, required obedience. It required warriors willing to burn worlds. It required sons who could kill without doubt. Ascalon asked instead, why must they kneel? Why cannot they choose? Because choice leads to chaos, the Emperor answered. Because free will, when multiplied across billions, creates only suffering. I offer them peace under a single banner. I offer them safety, order, the cessation of pointless war. Is that not merciful? It is mercy administered with a blade, Ascalon said. It is peace purchased with the extinction of freedom, and it will fail. The Emperor's face did not change, but those watching sensed a shift in the nature of space itself, as though the laws of physics had momentarily become negotiable. It will not fail because I will not permit it to fail. No, Ascalon agreed, and his sadness seemed to deepen. But I am not you, and I cannot be what you wish me to be. Yet he was loyal. This is the key to understanding Ascalon and the root of his tragedy. Despite his doubts, despite his conviction that his father's path led toward catastrophe, Ascalon loved the Emperor. He believed in him, even as he disbelieved in his methods. And so, when the Emperor offered him a legion and a portion of the Great Crusade, he accepted. I will serve, Ascalon said, but I will serve in my own way, and I will not pretend to agree with what I believe to be wrong. The Emperor studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded, as though his worst fears had been confirmed. That is the curse of conscience, he said. You will serve loyally and you will suffer for it. And still, it will not be enough. The legion that came to Ascalon was known as the Silver Reconcilers, though history would later rename them the Forgotten Legion and finally struck them from the rolls entirely. But in those early days of the Crusade, they were magnificent. They numbered over 180,000 Astartes, superhuman warriors with physiology that made them capable of extraordinary feats of endurance and combat prowess. But unlike the brutal berserkers and tactical savants who commanded other legions, the Silver Reconcilers became something unprecedented. Ascalon did not train his legion to be killers. He trained them to be teachers, ambassadors, and warriors only as a last resort. He implemented a doctrine called the Doctrine of Reconciliation, which held that the primary goal of conquest should be the willing union of worlds with the Imperium, not their subjugation. To accomplish this, he recruited the finest speakers, the most clever diplomats, the most charismatic agents the Imperium could produce. He paired them with warriors who understood that force was not merely an instrument of war, but a language that could be spoken with mercy. We are conquerors, he would tell his officers, but we need not conquer spirits. Bodies bend before strength, this is inevitable. But minds, hearts, the essential nature of a culture. These can only be changed through reason, or through the slow work of being shown a better way. The campaigns of the Silver Reconcilers became legendary. They brought dozens of worlds into the Imperium's fold with barely a shot fired. Ascalon's reputation grew until it rivaled even the great warlords like Lorgar and Angron. But where those Primarchs were revered with fear and religious fervor, Ascalon was regarded with a strange mixture of love and suspicion. The Imperium's high commanders could not decide whether to promote him as a paragon of the Emperor's vision or to contain him as a dangerous idealist. The Emperor himself seemed divided on the matter. In his rare communications with Ascalon, he would express both pride and concern. You are accomplishing the crusade, he wrote in one message. But you are accomplishing it in a way that undermines the foundation upon which the crusade must rest. Obedience through force is reliable. Obedience through persuasion is not. Obedience through persuasion is voluntary. Ascalon responded, and voluntary loyalty is the only kind worth having. There is no time for such philosophy, the Emperor replied. The crusade must be completed within our lifetimes. Billions of worlds must be brought into compliance. We cannot afford your mercy. Yet he did not recall Ascalon. He did not dissolve the Silver Reconcilers. Instead, he allowed this contradiction to persist. A son who embodied values at odds with the Imperium's fundamental nature, leading a legion that fought for a vision of conquest that was, in many ways, antithetical to conquest itself. It was perfect generational tragedy. The Emperor, perhaps, was already beginning to understand what was coming. Perhaps he believed that Ascalon's philosophy, however wrong he believed it to be, would be necessary in the long darkness that followed. Or perhaps he simply could not bear to have his son removed, and so allowed the paradox to continue, hope warring with doubt in his own mind. For 12 years, the Silver Reconcilers shone. They brought nearly 300 worlds into the Imperium's fold, and of those, a remarkable proportion remained stable, productive, and genuinely committed to the imperial ideal, not from fear but from genuine belief that the Emperor's vision, however flawed, was preferable to the alternatives. But 12 years is a long time to exist in a state of internal contradiction. And in the 12th year, that contradiction finally broke. Vertica Prime was an agricultural world of surpassing beauty. Its continents bloomed with croplands that fed an entire sector. Its people, the Verdii, had developed a civilization of considerable sophistication. They had mathematics, philosophy, weapons of respectable make, and a complex political structure that had maintained relative peace for over 3,000 years. They also had a slight problem. Their society was organized around the fundamental principle that all beings possessed an intrinsic right to exist according to their nature. This included the existence of what the Imperium would classify as a xenos species, small insectile creatures called the Hren that had evolved alongside the Verdii for millennia. The Hren were genuinely sentient. They had art, music, complex language. They posed no threat to the Verdii and had, in fact, served as allies and intellectual partners in the development of Vertican civilization. But the Imperium's doctrines were absolute on the matter of xenos. The presence of alien intelligence on a human-controlled world was not a matter for negotiation. The Hren had to be exterminated. When Ascalon received the order, he requested a convocation with the High Strategist overseeing the sector. I imagine that conversation, though I was not present. I imagine him reading the order 3 times, hoping that his understanding was mistaken. I imagine him composing responses in his mind, each more desperate than the last. And finally, I imagine him making a choice that sealed his fate. Ascalon refused, not negotiated a compromise, not requested a delay. He simply responded to the command with the word no, and then explained why. The Hren are sapient beings, his message read. They have contributed to the development of Vertican civilization. They pose no strategic threat to human expansion. To exterminate them would be an act of genocide, not of strategic necessity. I will not permit it. The response from High Command was, to isolated colonies where they could flourish or fail according to their own merit. And the Imperium, for once, did not consume the xenos world in purifying flame. Here I must confess something. I was there, at the outer edges of that moment, as one of the Emperor's 10,000, a custodian guardian. I wore the armor of divinity and carried weapons that could level mountains. I also, in that moment, understood for the first time that divinity could be wrong. It was not a comfortable understanding. The Emperor's response came not in word but in deed. He convened a tribunal on the void station Kahal Meridian, and he summoned Ascalon to answer for his disobedience. Most of the other Primarchs attended. I remember Lorgar's face, twisted in righteous anger. He believed that to question the Emperor was to question the fundamental order of reality itself. I remember Angron's confusion, as though he could not understand that anyone would choose anything other than violence. I remember Rogel Dorn, measuring, calculating, trying to understand how his brother could have been so strategically foolish. And I remember the Emperor's face. He looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. Tired, disappointed. The kind of disappointment that suggested he had hoped for better, even while expecting worse. You refused a direct command, the Emperor said. His voice was not angry. That was the worst part. His voice was the voice of a father disappointed in his son. I refused an immoral order, Ascalon replied. He stood without armor, without weapons, a concession to the solemnity of the moment. Father, I understand the nature of the crusade. I understand that you believe that human survival requires the extinction of all competing intelligence, but I cannot agree, and I will not kill the innocent to satisfy a doctrine. These xenos are not innocent, the Emperor said. They exist. Their existence is a threat to human dominion. This has been explained to you. This is the nature of the galaxy we must conquer. There is no room for mercy. Then I will create room, Ascalon said. I will carve out a space where mercy is possible. I will establish colonies where xenos and humans can coexist. I will prove that cooperation is more powerful than conquest. There was silence in the chamber. I could feel the weight of ages in that silence. The Emperor, who had unified Terra, who had seen empires rise and fall, who carried within his mind the knowledge of technology and philosophy that had accumulated across human civilization's brightest centuries, stood confronting a son who believed he could refute the logic of millennia. I cannot permit it, the Emperor said finally. The stability of the Imperium depends upon clear doctrine, upon the certainty that we will do what is necessary. If my sons begin to question, to refuse orders based on personal moral conviction, the entire structure collapses. I will not have it. Then you do not truly believe in me, Ascalon said, and I heard in his voice the grief of a child whose father had failed him in the moment most crucial. You do not believe that I am capable of moral choice. You believe I am a tool to be used or discarded as convenience dictates. Yes, the Emperor said, and the word fell like a hammer. That is precisely what I believe. You are a tool, a magnificent, powerful, intelligent tool, but a tool nonetheless, and a tool that does not serve its purpose must be unmade. At that moment, I understood something that I have carried with me for 10,000 years. The Emperor was not evil, but he was something worse than evil. He was a man who loved his sons, and who loved them in a way that required him to betray everything they were. He made them to be free, and then discovered that freedom was incompatible with the project he had undertaken. And rather than change the project, he chose to transform himself into something that could not love them as they deserved to be loved. That is the real tragedy of the Emperor, not that he fell, but that he sacrificed his own humanity in order to create the very catastrophe he sought to prevent. The trial lasted 3 days. Every one of the Primarchs was required to speak. Some condemned Ascalon outright. Others argued for clemency. A few, Corax, Sanguinius, Lionel Johnson, seemed to understand that something essential was at stake in his fate, though none of them could articulate it, even to themselves. The Emperor listened to all of them, and then he rendered his judgment. Ascalon is hereby removed from command of the Silver Reconciler's Legion. The Legion will be integrated into other commands under officers loyal to the doctrines of the Imperium. All records of the Silver Reconcilers are to be struck from the Imperial Archive. All monuments to their campaigns are to be dismantled. All vestiges of their heraldry are to be expunged. Ascalon himself will be imprisoned on Titan, in the vaults beneath the Adeptus Custodes Fortress Monastery, where he will live out his days under guard. It was, for a Primarch, a kind of death. Physical death would have been kinder. Instead, Ascalon was to be erased, his entire legion, his entire legacy, his entire vision for what the Imperium might become. All of it was to be struck from the records as though it had never existed. "You are no longer my son," the Emperor said, and those words were the most terrible of all. "You are a prisoner of war against the Imperium itself." I was among the custodians assigned to escort Ascalon to his imprisonment. I will not describe that journey. I have tried many times, but there are some experiences that language cannot adequately convey. To watch a god walk toward his own execution, knowing that he walked willingly, knowing that he accepted the justice of it, even while protesting its premise. This is something that lodges itself in the soul like a wound that can never fully heal. We placed him in a cell at the very bottom of Titan, in a chamber where no light reached except what filtered in through a small grill. We left him with books, the Emperor permitted that much, and a small window through which he could occasionally glimpse the stars. And we left him with guards, eternal and unchanging, to ensure that he would never escape, never attempt to contact the outside world, never remind anyone that he had existed. Ascalon's legion, scattered to the winds, was reformed under new command. Some units were transferred wholesale to the Luna Wolves under Horus's command. Others were integrated into the Emperor's children under Fulgrim. A few of the most suspect units were simply demobilized and their members dispersed throughout the wider Imperium. Within a year, there was barely a trace of them left. Historians later would simply note that there had been a period of confusion in the Crusades' records, a time when some of the data seemed to be missing or corrupted. The Adeptus Historia would theorize that it was a malfunction in the ancient data storage systems, a common enough occurrence. No one would ever connect those missing files to Ascalon, because there was no one alive or willing to make that connection. Now I will tell you what was not supposed to be told. I am the only one left alive who knew Ascalon. The Emperor is gone, the Primarchs are gone or lost, and the Imperium has calcified into a structure so rigid that it cannot even imagine that there was ever another vision for what it might have been. But memory is a kind of immortality, and I have carried this story within myself for 10,000 years because it seemed important that someone remember. Because forgetting is a kind of death, and Ascalon deserves better than death. Here is what the records do not contain. I continued my service to the Imperium after Ascalon's imprisonment, as custodians do. For 300 years, I served the Emperor in various capacities. I was present at Mons Gropius when the Emperor finally began to withdraw from the governance of the Imperium. I was present at the Interrex incident when the war machine called War Master Horus began his fall. And I was present, though at a great distance, when the galaxy tore itself apart. During the Horus Heresy, I was assigned to a garrison on a world in the fringe reaches, a place so far from the center of the Imperium that news reached us months or years after the events themselves. It was there that I received a visitor, a creature of contradiction, half ghost and half flesh, moving through the void as though the laws of physics were merely suggestions. It was Ascalon. He should not have been able to escape. His cell was sealed with the best locks that human technology could produce. He was under constant guard by creatures, the custodians, whose entire existence was predicated on their loyalty to the Emperor. And yet somehow, he had found his way out, or something had found him and brought him out. "I have left the fortress," he told me, and his voice was strange, multi-layered, as though multiple versions of him were speaking simultaneously. "I have walked the warp. I have seen what my father feared and what he denied, and I have come to understand the true nature of the tragedy that he engineered." "You should not be here," I told him. I was saying it more to myself than to him. I should have raised an alarm. I should have called for backup, but I did not. "The Emperor's fear was not of chaos," Ascalon continued, "but of choice. He could not tolerate a universe in which beings made their own decisions, because decision-making involves the possibility of choosing against him. I have kept that book for 10,000 years. Through the Horus Heresy, through the Long War, through the Age of Strife and the Age of Redemption and all the other ages that have followed. I have hidden it in places of power and places of obscurity. I have ensured, through methods both subtle and profound, that the knowledge contained within it could never be completely destroyed. And I have come to understand something that I believe Ascalon knew all along. The Imperium failed not because the Emperor's vision was too ambitious, but because it was not ambitious enough. He sought to create certainty in a universe that is fundamentally uncertain. He sought to eliminate the possibility of choice in a cosmos where choice is the only real freedom. And in doing so, he created the very chaos he sought to prevent, because the universe does not permit the elimination of possibility. It merely redirects it. The cracks in the Imperium do not exist because of Horus or chaos or the accumulated mistakes of 10,000 years. They exist because somewhere, in the deepest vaults of the palace, in the hearts of those few who remember, there lives a memory of a different possibility. A possibility that was struck from history but not from reality. A possibility that echoes in every act of mercy shown by an Astartes, in every world that chose loyalty over obedience, in every moment when an imperial servant chose conscience over doctrine. Ascalon's legion may have been erased from the records, but they were not erased from the galaxy. Their philosophy survived, fragmented and transformed in 1,000 small acts of rebellion against the machine of absolute control. The rogue traders who treat with xenos species and maintain peace through negotiation rather than fire. The commissars who stay the hands of zealous commanders. The rare, precious moments when the Imperium acts with something that looks suspiciously like grace. These are the echoes of the forgotten Primarch. These are the places where his vision survives, even though his name is no longer spoken. I write this now because I am approaching the end of my existence. The custodians are long-lived, but even we are not eternal. My memories are beginning to fray at the edges. I am starting to forget, and I cannot permit the story of Ascalon to disappear entirely. Somewhere, in the deep places of the Imperium, there are others who remember him. Fragments of the Silver Reconcilers, their gene sequence rewritten, but their nature unchanged. Ancient servitors who recall his voice. Scripts hidden in the most secure vaults. Evidence, always carefully preserved, that there was once a son of the Emperor who believed that the galaxy could be healed through something other than conquest. The official history will never change. The Adeptus Historiae has its canon, and that canon is jealously guarded. Ascalon will remain the forgotten Primarch, the son erased from history, the tragedy that never happened. But I am telling you now, whoever finds these words, that he was real, that he lived and struggled and ultimately chose conscience over obedience, that he was crushed for daring to believe in a better way. And I'm telling you that he was both right and wrong. He was wrong about the possibility of mercy in a universe that deals in absolutes. He was wrong about the capacity of free will to heal what has been broken. But he was right about one thing, that obedience without love is slavery, and that a God who demands obedience from those who should be free is no God at all, but merely a tyrant. The Imperium will endure. It will stumble forward through the darkness, sustained by faith and fear and the accumulated achievements of 10,000 years. But it will endure damaged, wounded by the absence of the possibility that Ascalon represented. It will be an Imperium that could have been greater had it been willing to trust its own children. That is the real tragedy. Not that Ascalon fell, but that he had to fall. Not that his legion was erased, but that the Imperium needed them erased in order to function. Not that he died in all but name, but that we all died a little with him. All of us who were forced to pretend that the erasure was just. I leave these words as a memorial to something that should have been. I leave them as a prayer for a better Imperium that will never come. And I leave them as a question that the Imperium has spent 10,000 years avoiding. What would have happened if the Emperor had trusted his son? What might we have become if mercy had been permitted to flourish alongside might? This account is being filed in the deepest vault of a ship that flies no flag and bears no name. It will be discovered only if the Imperium falls, or if someone with sufficient courage dares to look where history has been deliberately obscured. I go to my rest knowing that this story at least will survive. That much is mercy enough. The unnamed custodian, 10,000 years post-collapse. What I did not include in my official record, what I could not include without ensuring my own erasure, was the existence of those who continued to serve Ascalon's vision, hidden within the very structure of the Imperium itself. The Silver Reconcilers, when scattered, were not truly destroyed. This is the secret that the High Lords have spent 10,000 years trying to suppress. Some of the Legion's strategic assets escaped into the vast bureaucratic machinery of the Adeptus Administratum. Others infiltrated the Scholastia Psychana, that great institution where the psychers of the Imperium are trained and catalogued. A precious few made their way into the ranks of the Inquisition itself, where they could operate with sufficient autonomy to avoid the tighter scrutiny placed upon the standing military forces. I came to understand this gradually, over the course of the centuries following Ascalon's imprisonment. Small signs at first. A merchant fleet operating under the auspices of the rogue trader Callista Vex, conducting trade negotiations with what should have been strictly prohibited xenos species, yet doing so with such diplomatic precision that the local Inquisition could not justify prosecution. A planetary governor on Vertica Prime itself, renamed by the Emperor to Exemplar Prime, in an attempt to erase its association with Ascalon, who implemented policies so remarkably merciful that the world became a model of prosperity rather than a monument to obedience. And then there were the books. The record I was given, the one bound in warp-touched leather, was not unique. Over the centuries, I discovered that there existed a network of hidden archives scattered throughout the Imperium. Ancient hives on Necromunda where lower-level admins maintained careful records of the Silver Reconciler's true history, disguised as entertainment fiction. A monastery on an agri-world in the Cadian sector where monks copied manuscripts of Ascalon's teachings in cipher, preserving them under the guise of devotional texts to the emperor. Even, I would later learn, within certain chapters of the Adeptus Astartes itself, chapters that had been seeded with descendants of the original legion, their genetic material preserved and reintroduced through careful breeding programs and purloined gene vaults. The most remarkable of these hidden congregations was something I did not discover until nearly 3,000 years into my service. It was during a classified operation in the Screaming Vortex region, a mission I was assigned to because my particular skills with ancient technology were needed, that I encountered the Black Scholars. They called themselves that for ironic reasons. They explained to me, in the hidden chamber deep beneath a research station that officially did not exist. The Black referred not to their morality, but to the books they kept, texts so old that the data crystals upon which they were stored had begun to degrade, turning the text appearing on their viewing screens into something that resembled black ink running across yellowed parchment. The scholars referred to their commitment to preserving knowledge rather than suppressing it, a radical stance in an Imperium where most learning had been calcified into dogma. "We are what the Imperium fears most," said their leader, an aged human whose body bore the scars of augmentation poorly performed, the kind of augmentation that comes not from the Adeptus Mechanicus' sterile forges, but from those who still remember how to maintain and improve technology through understanding rather than ritual. We are people who have read too much to ever forget. "How long have you existed?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Since the day the order came to erase the Silver Reconcilers," she said. "We are their descendants in spirit, if not in blood. Some of us are descendants in blood as well, children born to the scattered members of the Legion, our genetic legacy diluted but not destroyed. We have spent 10,000 years doing what you have been doing alone, preserving the memory of another way." It was in that moment that I understood the true scope of Ascalon's legacy. He had not merely been erased. He had been preserved in the small acts of mercy scattered across the galaxy like seeds waiting for fertile ground. Every time an Imperial commander chose negotiation over annihilation, there was the ghost of Ascalon's philosophy. Every world that thrived under just governance rather than fear-based compliance, every xenos species that survived through treaty rather than extermination, every moment when the Imperium was less terrible than it might have been, these were all, in their own way, monuments to the forgotten Primarch. "Why reveal this to me?" I asked the Black Scholar. "Because you are the last of the custodians who remembers him," she replied. "Your death is approaching. We have the means to see such things, and we need the authentic record, not the incomplete account written by a faithful custodian, but the truth, the full truth, including all the ways in which Ascalon was both right and wrong, both tragic and necessary." What she meant by this, I would come to understand over the next several decades of collaboration with the Black Scholars. The Black Scholars possessed something I did not: access to records that had been preserved not by memory or by hidden books, but by the most fundamental technology in all the Imperium, the human mind itself, augmented and stored in ways that violated every principle the Adeptus Mechanicus held sacred. They showed me recordings that had been stored in neural archives, experiences that had been literally transcribed from the minds of those who had walked beside Ascalon. I experienced, through their strange technology, moments of his life that were not available in any written record. I saw Ascalon, as a young man, standing in the Temple of Consequence on Corvus Prime, debating philosophy with Viridian. I could feel his frustration, not with the Keth's teachings, but with his own body. He was accelerating beyond what even his creators had anticipated. His mind was capable of processing information at speeds that made ordinary conversation feel like speaking with the cognitively challenged. His body was developing strength that seemed to increase exponentially with each passing month. And yet, the Keth insisted on teaching him restraint, on showing him the price of that strength, on making him confront the moral weight of his own power. "Do you know what it feels like?" he demanded of Viridian in one recorded moment. To be capable of moving mountains but trained to believe that moving mountains is wrong? Yes, Viridian replied with the gentle certainty of a being who had lived for 3,000 years. I know exactly how it feels, because I am capable of moving mountains. My people evolved the ability to manipulate matter at subatomic levels. We developed technologies that could crack worlds. And we learned through terrible experience that capability and morality are not the same thing. The stronger you become, the more important it is to understand the cost of using that strength. But what if that cost is necessary? Ascalon asked. What if mercy costs more than justice? Then you will have to decide which matters more, Viridian answered. And you will have to live with that decision, whatever it is. That is what it means to be free, my son. Not the freedom to do whatever you wish, but the freedom to choose what matters most to you and to accept the consequences of that choice. I realized, in experiencing this moment through the neural archive, that the tragedy of Ascalon was even deeper than I had previously understood. The Emperor had not created him to be free, but the Keth, in raising him, had insisted on freedom as the highest good. And that freedom, more than his refusal to commit genocide, more than his philosophy of mercy, was what the Emperor could not tolerate. The Black Scholars explained this to me in the context of the broader history of the Primarchs. Each of the 20 had been created as a tool, yes, but each had been shaped by the circumstances of their upbringing into something slightly different than the Emperor had intended. Some, like Horus, had been shaped by circumstances into tyrants even more absolute than the Emperor himself. Others, like Korax, had been shaped into beings tormented by the gap between what they wanted to be and what they had been created to be. But Ascalon was unique because his upbringing had shaped him into something the Emperor genuinely had not anticipated, a being capable of understanding his own nature and choosing to transcend it. Do you see? One of the Black Scholars, a woman named Kahira, who had been the keeper of the neural archives for 2 centuries, asked me. The Emperor believed that if you understood what you were, you would be satisfied with it. That self-knowledge would lead to acceptance, not rebellion. But Ascalon understood what he was, and he rejected it. He looked at his own nature, the godlike power, the superhuman capability, and he said, I can be something more than this. I can choose to be something better than this. And that choice terrified the Emperor more than any mutation or corruption ever could, because it suggested that there was something in the design of the Primarchs that could not be controlled through genetic engineering or psychological conditioning. What was he truly? I asked. Ascalon, what did he become? Kahira smiled, and in that smile was 10,000 years of carefully preserved wonder. He became what he was always meant to be, a question, a living, breathing refutation of the idea that power and obedience must go hand in hand. The Emperor thought he was creating emperors, beings who would rule with absolute authority. But what he actually created by accident or divine providence was philosophers, beings capable of understanding that there might be better ways than conquest. Most of the others became tyrants, I said. Yes, Kahira agreed. But Ascalon became a conscience. And a conscience, to an empire built on the certainty of absolute power, is worse than any tyrant could ever be. A tyrant can be defeated, but a conscience whispers, doubts, questions. It is the voice in the back of the mind that suggests another possibility. And the Imperium has spent 10,000 years trying to silence that voice, and yet it remains. It is stronger now than it has ever been. What the Black Scholars revealed to me over the course of our collaboration was that the Horus Heresy itself had not been what the official histories claimed. Oh, Horus had rebelled, yes. The corruption of the War Master had been real, his fall had been genuine, but the rebellion that followed was not a simple conflict between loyalty and ambition. It was a far more subtle war, one that had been fought for 10,000 years before Horus had even heard the whispers of chaos. The rebellion had begun with Ascalon's refusal to commit genocide. That refusal had created a fissure in the Imperium's foundation, a small crack, barely noticeable, but a crack nonetheless. That crack had allowed other thoughts to seep in, other questions, other possibilities. When Horus fell, he fell into a framework that had already been prepared by Ascalon's rebellion. The War Master became the vessel for a far larger war, the war between the Imperium's stated values, mercy, justice, the preservation of human dignity, and its actual practice, conquest, genocide, the subordination of all consciousness to a single authority. Ascalon's rebellion was unconscious, Kahira explained. He did not intend to start a heresy. He merely refused to do something he believed to be wrong. But in doing so, he created the possibility of refusal. He showed that it was possible to love the Emperor and still disobey him, that loyalty and disagreement could coexist. But Horus did not love the Emperor, I protested. Horus rebelled against him. In the end, no, Kahira agreed. But in the beginning, Horus was just like Ascalon, a son who loved his father but could not accept his methods. The difference was that the Imperium had not yet learned to tolerate such contradiction. With Ascalon, they had tried to suppress it through imprisonment. With Horus, they attempted to channel it toward productive ends. Neither worked. But the lesson was different. The lesson, she explained, was this. The Imperium could not be reformed from within because its fundamental structure depended upon the absolute obedience it demanded. Any force capable of questioning that obedience, any consciousness capable of saying no, was a threat to the entire system. And so the system developed antibodies against such consciousness. It created structures designed to suppress mercy, to reward cruelty, to make obedience seem not just necessary but virtuous. Yet, despite these efforts, mercy persisted. Ascalon's philosophy, though officially erased, had infected the Imperium like a beautiful virus. In the 10,000 years following his imprisonment, there had been countless small moments of grace. Battles fought with minimal casualties when maximum casualties would have been permissible. Conquered worlds treated with surprising dignity. Xenos species preserved through overlooked bureaucratic loopholes rather than purging fire. All of these moments were small heresies against the doctrine of absolute conquest. All of them echoed Ascalon's central question. Why must they kneel? Why cannot they choose? But there was a price to this preservation of Ascalon's memory. And as Kahira and the other black scholars explained it to me, I came to understand the true tragedy beneath the tragedy. The Imperium had needed to erase Ascalon, not because his philosophy was dangerous, though it was, but because the existence of Ascalon proved something that the Imperium's entire theological framework depended upon denying. It proved that the Emperor was not infallible, that his judgments could be questioned, that there were values more important than obedience. By maintaining Ascalon's memory, the black scholars and others like them had become what Kahira called bearers of doubt. They carried within themselves the knowledge that another way had been possible, that the Imperium might have been something different, something better, if only the Emperor had been willing to trust his own sons. "Do you understand what this means?" Kahira asked me, as we stood in the depths of the archive, surrounded by 10,000 years of preserved memories and forbidden knowledge. "We are the priesthood of a God who does not exist. We maintain the memory of a possibility that has been erased from official history. We are heretics in the service of a heresy that was never completed." "Then why do you do it?" I asked. "Why preserve these memories when they can only bring suffering?" Kahira's face grew sad, and for a moment I could see the weight of 10,000 years of burden written in the lines of her aged features. Because forgetting is death, not physical death. The Imperium will persist, will endure, will stumble forward through the darkness as it always has. But it will be a death of possibility, a death of the potential for something better. And I believe, we all believe, that the potential for something better, however distant, however impossible, is worth preserving, even at great cost. She took me deeper into the archive then, to a chamber I had not seen before. In it were preserved not neural archives or written records, but something far more precious, the voices of the Forgotten Legion themselves. Conversations recorded through technology so ancient that even the Adeptus Mechanicus would not have recognized it, preserved in crystalline matrices that seemed to exist partially outside of normal space. I heard them, the soldiers of the Silver Reconcilers, speaking of their experiences. A young warrior named Talion, describing the time his unit had negotiated the peaceful surrender of an entire world without firing a single shot, and how that peace had brought him more satisfaction than any victory in battle ever could. A captain named Meridia, reflecting on the moment she realized that her purpose was not to conquer, but to heal. A veteran named Sorcus, speaking with deep regret about the one time the Silver Reconcilers had been forced to engage in combat, and how that violence had seemed to violate something essential in their nature. These were the soldiers of Ascalon's legion. These were the Astartes who had accepted his philosophy not because they were forced to, but because they came to genuinely believe in it. And as I listened to their voices, preserved like ghosts in crystalline matrices, I understood something I had been resisting for 10,000 years. Ascalon had been right. Not about everything. His utopian dreams of peaceful coexistence were perhaps naive. The galaxy is not kind to naivety. But he had been right about the central issue, that there could be a kind of strength that does not depend upon the annihilation of what opposes it, that there was a form of power more sustainable, more beautiful, and ultimately more effective than the power of conquest and destruction. The Imperium had survived for 10,000 years through fear and absolute obedience. But it had survived as a corpse survives, through momentum and the refusal to acknowledge its own death. The Imperium that Ascalon had imagined, one based on the consent of the governed, on the choice of beings to participate in something greater than themselves, on the possibility of mercy within strength, that Imperium might never exist. But it had been possible. And for 10,000 years, in small acts and quiet refusals, people had been building toward it anyway. I write this now, knowing that my time approaches its end. Kahira passed from existence 3 centuries ago, her mind transcribed into neural matrices before her body failed, achieving a form of digital immortality that would have horrified the Adeptus Mechanicus even as they secretly coveted the technology. The other Black Scholars continue their work, though they tell me that the networks are becoming harder to maintain. The Inquisition grows ever more sophisticated in its detection methods. The grip of dogma tightens year by year. But there is something I must add to the historical record, something that even the Black Scholars do not fully understand. It concerns the nature of what Ascalon has become in the 10,000 years since his imprisonment and apparent escape. The custodian who encountered him on that fringe world was correct in his perception, but incomplete in his understanding. Ascalon did not escape Titan's vaults simply through the exercise of will, however powerful his will might be. He was released. By whom? That is a question I have spent 3,000 years investigating, and the answer has led me to a conclusion I can barely articulate, so profound are its implications. I believe that the Emperor himself released Ascalon, not consciously. The Emperor, bound upon the Golden Throne, is no longer capable of conscious action in any conventional sense. But the Emperor exists now in a state of perpetual psychic communion with the Imperium itself. His consciousness has, in a sense, become distributed across the entire psychic matrix that binds Imperial civilization together. And within that distributed consciousness, there exists something that might be called regret. An echo of recognition that the son he imprisoned might have been the one person capable of saving him from his own nature. The Imperium has begun to change, slowly, imperceptibly, but unmistakably. The grip of the Adeptus Mechanicus has loosened slightly. Xenos species that should have been purged have found diplomatic solutions instead. Worlds that should have been raised have been permitted to exist. The Inquisition, for all its power, has been unable to entirely stamp out the small heresies that emerge from time to time. The cults that speak of a God who valued mercy, the philosophers who question the doctrine of absolute obedience, the dreamers who imagine what the Imperium might become if it were willing to trust its own people. These changes are small, almost imperceptible, but they are happening, and I believe they are the echo of Ascalon's imprisonment finally being reversed. In a very real sense, the forgotten Primarch is working his will upon the Imperium even now, 10,000 years after his supposed death. Not through direct action, but through the slow work of changing hearts and minds. Through the preservation of memory, through the quiet refusal of countless individuals to accept that the current state of the Imperium is inevitable or necessary or right. This is his true legacy. Not the Silver Reconcilers, magnificent though they were, not his philosophy, though it survives in 1,000 small variations, but his stubborn, persistent refusal to allow the Imperium to forget that another way had been possible. The Emperor wanted to erase him. But you cannot erase a question once it has been asked. You cannot unthink a thought once it has been thought. You cannot make people forget that mercy existed, that mercy is possible, that mercy might be the highest form of strength. This is the real tragedy of the forgotten Primarch. Not that he fell, but that he was right, that the Emperor's fear of him was justified, that Ascalon truly was dangerous not because he was destructive, but because he was constructive in a way that the Imperium could not afford to acknowledge. As I prepare for my final rest, I leave this addendum to the record with the Black Scholars. I leave it in the hope that someday, when the Imperium has finally begun to transform into something better than it is, someone will read these words and understand the change that is coming, the slow reformation of the Imperium, the gradual recognition that, obedience without love is slavery, that strength without mercy is tyranny, that choice is the highest good and the most dangerous threat. All of this is the work of Ascalon the Forgotten. His imprisonment was never truly about preventing him from acting. It was about the Emperor's futile attempt to prevent himself from acknowledging what Ascalon represented. And as the Imperium slowly, reluctantly begins to change, it is finally listening to the question that Ascalon asked 10,000 years ago. Why must they kneel? Why cannot they choose? The answer is beginning to take shape. Not quickly, not easily, but it is taking shape nonetheless. And in that slow transformation lies the true victory of the forgotten Primarch, not the triumph of his specific philosophy, but the vindication of his right to ask the question in the first place. I will make this brief, for my time is truly running short now. The augmentations that have sustained me for so many millennia are beginning to fail. Even a custodian cannot defy entropy forever. There is one last revelation I must make, though it may destroy everything the Black Scholars have built. It concerns the nature of my own persistence. Why I have lived so long, why my memories have been so perfectly preserved, why I was chosen to witness Ascalon and to preserve his legacy. The truth is this: I do not know if I am truly who I believe myself to be. It is possible that I am simply a custodian who lived an extraordinarily long life. It is possible that the Black Scholars have been preserving a false narrative, one built on the testimony of someone who is not in fact who he claims to be. But it is also possible, and this possibility haunts my final hours, that Ascalon's hand extends even here. That the preservation of his memory has been so perfect, so consistent, so impossibly maintained across 10,000 years, because he himself has been guiding it. That the custodian who encountered him on that fringe world was something other than a simple servant of the Imperium. That I myself might be something other than what I have always believed. If that is true, if Ascalon has been guiding the preservation of his own memory, maintaining the network of the Black Scholars, working through intermediaries and hidden agents to ensure that his voice is not entirely silenced, then it suggests something truly remarkable. It suggests that the Emperor was not the only one capable of distributed consciousness, that the Primarchs, like their father, might exist in a state that transcends simple mortality, that Ascalon, imprisoned though he was never truly powerless. Or perhaps I am simply an old being, reaching for meaning in a universe that often contains none. Perhaps my final revelation is only the confusion of a mind beginning to fail. But the question remains, and it is the question with which I wish to end this account. What is the nature of the forgotten Primarch? Is he a prisoner forever bound beneath the vaults of Titan? Is he a ghost lingering in the corners of the Imperium's consciousness? Is he a god working slowly and patiently toward the reformation of all things? Or is he perhaps something even stranger, a question that has become conscious of itself, a possibility that has learned to dream? I leave this question to those who come after. I leave it as my final gift, or perhaps as my final curse. May they find better answers than I have managed to discover.